Do you deal with a defensive person? Or maybe if you're like me, you are the defensive person. And I mean, it happens, but if it's chronic in a relationship, it causes problems because the person who's trying to communicate in a healthy way will start to hesitate because when they bring something forward to the defensive person, it starts an argument, it starts a fight, it doesn't even feel like it's got any point at all. They don't listen. And so they'll stop communicating. And when you stop communicating, resentment will begin to rise, which is really poisonous for relationships. And also, you'll stop this connection. The connection part of communication will be lost if you stop communicating the things that you need to say. So we need to have a way to deal with defensiveness, and I'm going to help you with that today by talking about why it happens, what to do before you approach them, how to communicate carefully through that exchange, and what to do if you trigger them. I'm Stacy Rocklein, and I help people create meaningful connections through healthy communication. And I feel qualified to speak about defensiveness because that's me. I am the person who, for the most of my marriage, has been defensive, and I've worked really hard on it, and I want to help you understand what's going on with someone who is being defensive so that you have success approaching them as well. It can look different ways. You can bring something to the table and it can look like they have justifications, they make up excuses, they turn around and blame you, or they blame all these other circumstances. They tell you that you're wrong. They might just shut down. That was the way I would do it. Inside, I would be doing all those other things, but the outside stance was just me kind of sitting there seething, not listening. So here's what's happening with the person who's super defensive. On a deep, deep level, this person feels unsafe. For whatever reason, it's like childhood wounds, the way they were raised, traumas, all kinds of things. Something contributed to this feeling, but in a nutshell, being criticized or receiving difficult feedback, making mistakes, being pointed out as wrong, feels really unsafe. Our worthiness gets wrapped up in getting things right and being perfect and not screwing up. And so we get defensive. And part of it has to do with an internal shaming system. So this is how this happens. The external world shames you and guilts you for things for a while. And at some point, you get done with that. You get tired of that. And so you decide, I'll do the shaming on the inside. I will set up my own internal shaming mechanism. And then I engage this so I can prevent any mistakes out in the rest of the world where I can have them pointed out by other people. So if someone's brought something to me that I've already been trying to shame myself for and I haven't been successful yet, or I missed something and didn't even realize, then it engages this defensive behavior. And so a lot of times I'm already working on that. I already know. And now it just feels like, oh, my internal system failed me because now someone else is pointing it out. That's like the deep level thing happening with defensive-ness. On the surface, and this is more for people who just get occasionally defensive and is not so chronic, maybe you feel like it was an unfair or untrue observation. From where I'm sitting, the story looks different from when someone else is sitting. And so when they present what they think, to me, it might not feel true. Or maybe I'm doing all of this stuff and one small thing gets pointed out. And so to me, that feels really unfair. Those are causes for defensiveness. Perhaps the person who's bringing something to me has done something similar in the past. And so instead of staying in this moment where I'm thinking about this thing that happened right now, I'm like, well, what about that time? And so that feels hypocritical. These are reasons that people get defensive. If I feel my character's being attacked, you're saying that I am a certain way. You're trying to assign an identity to me. You're trying to assign a specific characteristic. That's going to cause defensiveness. perfectly normal. Or if it's something I'm already working on, like I said before, or I'm feeling hopeless to solve, and then it's pointing out, the only thing I can do is be defensive about it. So when our stories don't line up, it might be normal to come back and be like, no, I don't think so, because it just doesn't feel like truth to us. That can be happening on the surface, just so you understand. One of the unfortunate side effects of defensive behavior is, and I never intended it this way, but it is the result, is that when you're super defensive all the time, people eventually will stop bringing things to you because they're like, that's pointless, starts a fight. And so it protects you in that way also. So those are all the things happening for the person who's being presented with information that they feel is unsafe and they've become defensive about. What do we do about it, right? What can you do? The first thing you can do is work before you approach. And you do that by weeding out what is yours. What is yours in there that could be causing defensiveness? Here are some suggestions I have for questions to ask yourself. Number one, are you trying to control behavior that's not in your own lane? Like that doesn't directly affect you. Sometimes we want to get a little bossy, a little controlling, and we will weigh in on someone else's the way they eat, exercise, sleep, run their life, how they communicate with their family of origin, what they should be doing at work, all kinds of things that don't directly affect us. We care about them, so we feel like we've got to really get in there and tell them, but that can cause defensive behavior because it's kind of not our business. Another thing is are you owning your own stuff? When something goes wrong in a relationship, everybody's right and everybody's wrong. And it's really important that you see what you're doing to contribute to it. Or you're paying attention to things that are similar that you've done in the past. Own your own stuff instead of just putting it all on them. And I'll show you in a second how that'll be beneficial. What's the purpose of this conversation? Is it because you need them to change behavior? You need them to take a different action to support you and support the relationship? Or are you bringing it up because you want them to feel bad, feel wrong, feel guilty? That's not the right purpose for giving somebody feedback, and makes sense that someone would get defensive in that case. Are you being critical or judgmental in your delivery, or kind of even in general about them? Somebody who's really defensive, believe me, is very sensitive to judgment and criticism. And in fact, if they have a really fragile self-worth, they are hyper sensitive to those things. So that judgment and that criticism can be felt very easily by them. So you want to make sure that you're not bringing that to the table. And also, are these your own fears and assumptions about their life? Like, here's an example. You love someone so much and you see them doing an unhealthy behavior and you want them to be around forever. So you're like, you shouldn't do that. Well, it's your assumption how that's going to pan out. It's your fear how that's going to pan out. It's not necessarily theirs. So you got to take your stuff through all of these gates first before you even go to the communication. And you're basically stripping off anything that you can ahead of time that could possibly trigger them before you do the next thing, which is have this conversation. And there are some things that you can do in this case too. First of all, walk in with empathy for their defensiveness. Something internally is causing them pain, and that's why they're doing it. It's not actually about you. It's about what they're dealing with inside. So if you can be empathetic about that, that's really helpful. Lead with what they do well. Everybody does things right. So tell them what they do well. Tell them like what they do correctly. That creates a connection. And when we have connection, we open our ears up to each other. So it's really important that you kind of layer these things that I'm going to go through in before you get to the ask. Next, own your own stuff. Own what you're doing to contribute to the problem. Own how you've done it in the past. Own anything that's yours here. So it feels like it's not a you fix this, you go fix it. It's a, hey, let's the two of us sit together on the couch, working this out together. Here's mine. What's yours? What are we going to do? Next, watch for a superior tone. Now, it may be very true that you are the one who's more educated in communication. You might be the person who watches videos or listens to podcasts or does your own personal work, who comes equipped with more stuff. But even when we're trying in the best of intentions to share a strategy, to the sensitive person, it can come off as condescending, like they're being corrected, like the parent is telling them, the child, how they should be doing it, or the teacher is telling them, the student. So even if you do have more information, we got to be really careful about that condescending tone, because a sensitive person will pick up on that right away. Next, watch language. Language is really important. If you say something like, hey, you always, or you never, those are real big sweeping statements, and they're not true. Does it anybody anywhere always or never do something? So if you take those out, they feel a little bit like you're trying to attach a characteristic to them, an identity to them. You never want to say, you are whatever, selfish, unorganized, lazy. You want to make sure that they don't feel like there's a character assassination happening, a character attack, because that'll definitely cause defensive behavior. And once you've done all of those things, you've laid your groundwork, now you can go to the request. You have brought something to somebody because you need to share how you feel, what you need, and basically you need their behavior to change. So you're making a request, you're doing an ask. It doesn't need to be a lengthy complaint, a lengthy explanation or observation of everything they did wrong. You want to make sure they understand how you feel and what you need, but make it as a request, not a delivery of complaint. Not I'm just going to tell you all this stuff about you. That's not really helpful anyway. The important thing is that we want behavior to change and that they understand how we feel. So those are all the things you're going to do during the communication. But finally, you might trigger them. People who are hyper defensive are easily triggered. So in that case, here's what you need to do. Number one, stop. Stop the conversation at that point. If you think about the word defensive, defense means they are feeling unsafe and they are defending themselves. And it is never the case that if you keep walking toward them with your information and someone's defensive, that they're going to be like, oh, okay, now that you're closer, I feel safer. That is never the case. The case is that they feel like they need to defend. So moving on, moving forward, pushing through is going to be pointless. You're not going to get anywhere. It's just time to stop, back away a little bit, stop. You're not attacking, but they feel attacked. So it's really important that you pause right there, because we have to deal with the trigger before we can be open enough to deal with the issue. If you don't deal with the trigger, you're never going to get to the issue. You can't steamroll a trigger. So we have to handle this first. So you stop. The next thing you do is you acknowledge what happened. You like call it out. You know, I feel like that might have come across as an attack. Let them know that you see what happened. If you have something to own in that moment, that goes a long way. If you need to apologize for something, or you didn't put it through those gates that I gave you for making sure it doesn't sound like judgment, right? Maybe you did come off judgy, or you were, controlling something that isn't yours. This is your chance to own that. And when you own things in a relationship, when you own your mistakes and you own your missteps, not only do you model non-defensive behavior, which is great, but also you are building trust. Trust happens for lots of reasons, but one way we build it in a relationship is by making mistakes and apologizing. And making mistakes and apologizing. And then the other person doesn't have to trust that we're going to get perfect, but they can trust that we are going to come back and make amends, make it right, apologize for it. So anytime you need to repair, you're actually strengthening your connection and strengthening your relationship, which is awesome. And then you want to do the return or the when are we going to deal with this? So you stopped, you owned whatever's yours, you called out the fact that they are feeling attacked, and you're asking them, okay, this may not be a great time, but we need to talk about this. Like don't let a defensive person off the hook by being defensive. You have things you need to say and you need to ask for in your relationship. So what you want to do is say, okay, maybe this didn't go so well right now. Do you want to keep going, or would it be better to come back to this another time? And give them that out, but that return is happening. Like, when do you want to revisit it? And I will tell you that as someone who has a tendency to be defensive and like that, it's my first response still. The first thing that happens to me is I want to be defensive, and I've worked really hard to set it here so I can stay open and hear what the person needs to share with me, but it's coming up. And if things go awry, that processing time for me is really good. That gives me more time to put down my defenses so I can hear what we need to do to connect with each other. Because you clearly need me to change a behavior to support our relationship and support you. And so when I have a little bit of space, I can start to go, okay, that's true. That makes sense. I can receive that. And I have the accountability of somebody bringing me back to it and saying, hey, we are going to talk about this. We can let you calm down a little bit, but we are going to talk about this. So that's what you want to do when they're triggered. You want to make sure that you handle that, and like take this little bit of this video, just the trigger part, use that everywhere. Take this whole piece, and when you're going to have a difficult conversation, think about those things. Walk it through those first gates and figure out what's yours. Talk about it in a way that really opens someone to communication. Have a plan for if they get triggered. It's helpful even if you don't have somebody in your life who's uber defensive. You might just apply it to all of your difficult conversations. So that's all I've got for you today. Lots of stuff in here, but really helpful if you are dealing with someone who's defensive. And if you recognized yourself in here, be gentle. I've been there, and you can work on this and you can show up differently. It just takes the mindfulness and understanding what's happening with you. If you enjoy this video, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel so that you will continue to receive all of these trainings for creating meaningful connections by refining your communication and making sure that it's healthy, loving, and supportive of you and your relationship. I'll see you next time.